My name's Steve Sandner. I've been in the community since I built my house in 2009. I was one of the original members of the retreat when it was founded in 1970 by Yogacharya J. Oliver Black. Now, you hear a lot about Yogacharya J. Oliver Black, who was an SRF minister, Self-Realization Fellowship, in Los Angeles. And he was appointed by Paramahansa Yogananda as a minister of Self-Realization Fellowship. And he was also a Kriya initiator, which Kriya is the method, the most advanced meditation technique taught by Self-Realization Fellowship. You can learn more about that if you read Paramahansa Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi. I first heard about Oliver Black from Swami Nirmalananda. He was an American, and he was a Swami. He taught yoga meditation classes at University of Illinois. I took his class, and then I visited his small ashram in Bloomington, Illinois, in the summer of 1968. So this is a long time ago. 1968 were days of anguish and turmoil for many personally and for the country in general because of the Vietnam War protests and the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. But there was also that year, same year, because of Maharishi and the Beatles, a surge of interest in Eastern spirituality and Indian culture. So as many of us learned about the Indian culture and yoga and Eastern philosophy, we had these dreams of going to India to become swamis and achieve enlightenment and become advanced yogis. And Nirmalananda, though he was an American, he had been to India, and he was initiated into the Swami order, and he had a background in Self-Realization Fellowship and in the Yogananda. When I met him, he had become more connected with Anandamoyi Ma and her ashram in India. And when he went to visit India, he became more a part of her group, which he brought back to the United States with his small group in his ashram in Illinois. And those practices were combined with the Self-Realization Fellowship teachings. So he had just visited Mr. Black at the Heart Institute when I met him, and he was really taken with him, Nirmalananda, this American Swami. And he regarded Mr. Black as a true saint. So he told us stories how he had met Mr. Black, and he talked about his invention of a flying saucer. And he told the story of how Yogananda had stopped the rain for Oliver Black. And he mentioned that Mr. Black had talked about his property in northern Michigan, his plans for a spiritual community for married couples. Now this caught my attention right away because the idea of leaving my friends and my family and practicing yoga, living in India as a monk for the rest of my life, that seemed like a really daunting thing that I wasn't, I told myself I wanted to do it, but yeah, in the back of my mind, saying, do I really want to do that? So I felt this wave of bliss come over me as he was telling stories about Mr. Black. He's called Yogacharya now, but back in those days he wasn't commonly called Yogacharya. We called him Mr. Black. So as I'm listening to these stories, I'm trying to picture, I wonder what Mr. Black's house in Detroit looks like. And I had this imagined thing in my mind of looking down at a house with pale yellow siding, modest house in a modest neighborhood. And I thought, well, I've heard Mr. Black was a millionaire, but it's possible he could live in a nice, modest house like that. Well, years later, I visited Mr. Black's house on Parkside Avenue in Detroit, and I looked back at my imagined vision, so-called vision, and laughed at myself how far off I was. I was way off of what his house actually looked like. He had a 3-story brick mansion, very comfortable house in Detroit. But many years later, I saw the house of Carol and Richard Armour at Chris Road in Gaylord. And I was never actually inside the house, but I passed it many times driving on Old 27. And it had pale yellow siding. And I was looking down at this house. It didn't actually come together for many years. Even the angle looking down from high was the same angle I had seen in my sort of imagination back in Bloomington, Illinois in 1968. So I don't know. Maybe I was being shown a glimpse of the future, a connection to the community, and maybe the community already existed then in the ethers. Don't know. So I hung around with Swami Nirmalananda's small group, and they left for India in the fall of 1968. And I started taking the SRF lessons, but I kept the routine that he had in the ashram and that strict vegetarian diet. And, meditations at least 1 hour morning and evening, and keeping silence 1 day a week, and I was not associating with worldly people by his advice. And I was playing a few music gigs, but my heart really wasn't in it. I lifted my monastic restrictions a little bit to go on a couple of dates, but I got this warning letter from the Swami from India, and he said, yeah, no, you don't really want to do that. You got to be really careful. So I had to tell Barbie, who I was dating at the time, that we wouldn't see each other anymore. So, and by this time I had written a letter to Mr. Black telling him I planned to visit him, and I was procrastinating. So fate had to give me a little push, and I got a striking phone call from Barbie one night, and she said she had met Mr. Black and she had an extraordinary experience. About the same time I received a reply letter from Mr. Black, and I opened the letter and he had a short reply, and I felt a wave of bliss come over me as I read this letter, and all of a sudden the urgency inside me was to go to Detroit as soon as possible to meet Mr. Black, and I did that and went to the SRF space, and as I walked into the Art Institute, I came to the hallway outside the auditorium, and I saw the book table, and I was greeted by a devotee, very friendly greeting, and yet another wave of bliss came over me, and I almost like, you could say, hearing a voice that said, "This is home," and I felt very much at ease and comfortable, and as associating with the devotees around Mr. Black, there was extraordinary camaraderie, and it's continuing on to this day. I was living in a communal house in Ann Arbor with Dale and Linda Hartka and other yogis, and all the Ann Arbor group would hang out together, and there was just an underlying feeling of friendship, love, joy, and among us. We helped each other, finding places to live, finding an apartment to rent, car repair, finding jobs, whatever. We were always there for each other to help each other. And this was the feeling of community, if you will. It was a magical time in those days. We would go in groups to the Art Institute, to the SRF Sunday services. We'd take trips to the ranch together. And Mr. Black would talk about Yogananda's concept of a world brotherhood colony, and talk about the future community would be happening at the ranch. It was all rather vague then, but the idea that we would be all living together in this idealistic group of friends it sounded like just a wonderful idea. So many of that Ann Arbor crowd became the first ranch staff members. So in a way, this was kind of the beginning of the concept of the community, with the spirit of yogis living together here on this property. And after a while, some of the long-time older devotees of Mr. Black and the Detroit group tried coming to live up here at the ranch, though very few were able to live out their lives completely living on the ranch property, thus giving us impetus for the need for starting the community. But this took a long time. So I got distracted for many years raising 5 kids. I was only able to get up here once a year if I was lucky. The last time I spoke with Mr. Black was in 1989, and I was tiptoeing past him as he was meditating on one of his cluster beds, which he invented, which were used for the seating at the Sunday services in the domes. I was tiptoeing past him. He grabbed me by the arm and said, "Where have you been?" And I got a shock of the urgency in his voice, and I made up my mind on the spot that I'd make a greater effort to spend more time here at the ranch. Even so, that it had to overcome many busy years before it actually happened, and I watched from afar as this community began to take shape. In the very first newsletter, Carol and Richard reported that they had signed the very first lease for Clear Lake Community Property on March 8th, 2001, and that was my birthday. That happened to be my birthday. So George and Mary Ann Johnson also signed soon after that, and they actually built the first house that summer. So the community was on its way. Then in 2006, I started spending my summers at the ranch, but I hadn't built my house yet. So when my dad passed away in 2007, I got an inheritance of about $150,000. I thought that would be enough to build a house. I knew nothing about investing money, so I asked my high school classmate, who had retired, based on her investments, what I should do with the money. And she said, do you plan to use the money within the next 2 years? And I said, yes, I plan to build a house. And I go, oh, did I really just say that? So she said, well, don't invest in stocks because you should put it in a safe money market account. And I go, well, yeah, but what about high-tech stocks? They're doing so well right now. I said, well, I guess I'll take your advice. And sure enough, in 2008, we had a big crash. I would have lost almost all my money if I had done what I was inclined to do. And some of my friends and family weren't so lucky. So when it came time to write the check for $21,900, I hesitated. And I thought, is this really what I want to do? I'm living in this beautiful climate in Arizona now. I'm close to my granddaughter, who I was close to, 2 of my kids. I could go to a big city and I could continue my music career. I could go back to Leelanau County, which is extraordinarily beautiful, with water and other close friends, and where I had worked and lived there for many years. It was just an offhand remark from Richard one day. He said, it put me over the top. He said something like this. Some people just aren't willing to take the risk, but you have to have the faith to do that, to be part of the community. So since I'd had this dream for so many years about living in the community at the ranch, I took the plunge, and I took it with full commitment and with great energy. And I built my house in 2009. So if you want to know more about some of the experiences of some of the residents, you can go on the website, on the very front page of the website, which is somcommunity.com. There's people who will talk about some more of their experiences. So that's my story.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Your story's all like my story.
Thank you,
We're all
Steve. Steve, I
nervous.
just have one question.
Any questions? Oh, yeah.
Did you ever regret it?
No, absolutely not.
Just
And
wanted to make
In
sure.
fact, I wrote an article for one of the newsletters where I talked about living in northern Michigan in itself, no matter what, is an experience, because you come into the beautiful surroundings of northern Michigan, the nature, the quiet, there's something about the light even in the sounds. And I lived in Leelanau County. It was very beautiful. I've lived in the city of Gaylord. I've lived in Traverse City area. And but there's something about the energy here at the ranch that is supreme in bringing out this northern Michigan experience. In fact, just this morning, when I woke up, I laid awake and I thought, gosh, I can't hear anything except, and I've said this over and over to everybody I meet, you can't hear anything except a little bit of the breeze and maybe a few birds, and there's just, it's just quiet, and not only that, it feels easy to access the bliss that you're trying to go after in meditation. It makes meditation easier. You're associating with other yogis, you're inspired, they're helping you, you're helping them. Did not regret it, to answer your question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
Any other questions?
When are you going to live here full-time, if you know?
Because I didn't quite make that clear. I
Yeah.
spend about half my time in Arizona, actually a little more than half, because of my work, the work cycle and the seasonal nature of the work I do. So I had always said about 10 years ago, I said, well, when my youngest granddaughter gets into high school, well, she's going to 9th grade this year. We'll see what happens. My work cycle is still working for me now. If I had to guess, I would ideally in 2 years, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah, well, that's all right. I just wondered if we were going to see you all the time.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Sing